Today's message is going to be a salvation message. Didn't start out that way, but it kind of ended there. We're talking about the disciples, and I was asked a long time ago, probably 2 months ago or more, if I would speak on Simon Peter because I know a fair amount about the guy. Kind of feel like we might have been friends had we lived a little closer together in time and geography. Didn't plan on this to be a salvation message, but it turned into that. And so I want to ask each of you, I'm going to get the scary stuff out of the way that we don't talk about a lot in church these days, not in this church, not in any other church. So I'm going to get the scary stuff out of the way because I'm in kind of a fun mood as usual. So it's not going to be some dark, heavy thing. But the truth is, number one, you need to ask yourself, deep in here, where nobody but can see but God, how are you? Is your salvation secure, do you think? And deep down, where nobody knows but you, is your inner peace secure like it ought to be? Bill Ashball said years ago on the day the Lord returns that there's going to be two lines, and no matter where you've spent every Sunday, no one will have to tell you which line to get into, and I believe that's true. I believe the churches are largely full of people that are saved by God's grace that have already bought their eternal ticket to heaven. But I also believe that there in every church that there are people that aren't saved, that everybody thinks they are. There are people that are deep down in their spirit. They're troubled and they're unsure. And I'm going to tell you right now, as a person who's been a confessed Christian since I was 32, and I'm almost 52, so I got almost 20 years in. I don't know, did I get a clock or anything on that? But those 20 years haven't all been where they are now, where I was completely sure. And so today, this is going to be an altar call type of a sermon. I don't know how we're going to get there, but we're going to get to a point where I'm going to open an altar. And what I'm asking you to do is for the next few minutes be thinking to yourself, how am I really? Do I really know absolutely for certain where I'm going to spend eternity? And if you do, well, hallelujah, I'll be seeing you at the back door, and that'll be awesome. But if you don't, today is the day of salvation. I said I'm going to get the scary part over with, stuff that we don't talk about much. But you're going somewhere forever. Now, I don't care what you believe, but there is no doubt you are going somewhere forever. You're going to heaven forever. You're laying in a grave forever until you turn to dust and everything around you does as well. Or you're going to hell forever, because hell is eternal also. So here in this church and over at my house, we believe that you're going to heaven or hell, and you're going there forever. And so, since we're talking about Simon Peter today, I'm going to use the scary quote right up front. There's a lot of them in here if you care to look. It's kind of out of style to talk about it. But this is one that I really like, and it's from 2 Peter 3. By the way, we're going to jump around some. And like I'll tell you in the past, anybody that wants a copy of my notes, the good news is, or the bad news is I have 8 pages of notes. The good news is I only brought 2. So there's a chance we'll get to Cracker Barrel before the sawmill gravy is all gone. But this one is from 2 Peter 3, and he says, starting in verse 9, "The Lord is not slow in keeping his promise, as some understand slowness. He is patient with you, not wanting anyone to perish, but everyone to come to repentance." I love that. That gives me goosebumps. What a great little scripture. It's not so great if you read just one more line. And this is the part. By the way, when we have a salvation message, if you're saved, it's still for you. Because there are people that you brush up against every day that aren't. And you need to remember that. We need to remember that. I need to remember that. So we read that part about he is patient, that he doesn't want anyone to perish. He wants everyone to accept Christ. He wants everyone to become saved. He wants to crowd up heaven as much as he can. And that's a wonderful part. And then you read one line further, and it says, "But the day will come like a thief." There's going to be a point where the patience is over. It says, "The heavens will disappear with a roar." Now, you've seen some floods and some tornadoes lately. I'm going to tell you right now, that's going to be pretty mild compared to this. "The heavens will disappear with a roar. The elements will be destroyed by fire, and the earth and everything in it will be laid bare." It says some manuscripts say burned up. Well, I'm going to tell you something. I believe that to be true, and I do not want any part of that. So, today is the day of salvation, the Word tells us. Today is the day you get your get-out-of-hell-free card if you don't have it. So, on to the little lighter stuff. I may come back and hit you with that one more time, who knows. But what I was asked by Trey was, "Hey, I know that you feel definitely a super closeness to Simon Peter, and he's your favorite person in the Bible. Would you be willing to cover for me in June?" I said, "Absolutely." And I said, "What do you want me to say?" And he said, "I want you to tell how Peter directly impacted your life, or has, or continues to." Well, that was a different way of asking, and I thought about that, and then I thought, well, my first thought was, well, we have a lot in common. Both of us, if you know me very well, are a little excitable. At times, maybe a little towards maybe even having a bad temper. Both of us, and I say this, I hope this doesn't sound like I'm bragging, because trust me, this is not the point, because just like Simon Peter, there's so much for us to be embarrassed about. Both of us are pretty bold. When I had been saved about 15 minutes, I went to every house on Highway 36 from Pendleton to our road at 850 over by Shenandoah High School, all by myself. I went to every house on the north side of the road. I don't know why, the north side. And I invited every single house to church. No one came. So I was clearly gifted at it. But I did it. And I had a pastor who was smart enough to not talk me out of it. So boldness is not a problem. Both of us at times have hung out with the wrong people. And not just before we got saved. You remember when Peter was warming his hands by the fire after they'd arrested Jesus? Well, that fire wasn't built by Christians. Both of us like boats and fishing. And both of us, over time, learn to love and trust the Lord more and more and more every day. I can say without any hesitation whatsoever that my walk with the Lord is the most secure it's ever been right now. Now, I don't know that it'll stay that way. I don't know how you guys are, but mine has a tendency to do some of this. Yeah, exactly. I would prefer it would just go, like I remember Clarence saying, well, it's perfectly normal for your faith and your strength to go up and then plateau and then up and then plateau. That's normal. Well, I don't know about you, but sometimes mine's not a plateau. Sometimes mine has a dip in it. So what we're going to talk about is what I call Simon Peter moving from from zero to hero. And I'm just going to hit a few things. And again, if you want to write them down, I'll give you the verse, but don't skip around. We're going to end at the hero part, which is Acts 2. But we see a lot of Simon Peter in action. And if you are a person that kind of has a good imagination, you can really see this in your mind because he is so human, which is right away was what kind of drew me to Simon Peter was just the fact that they wasn't portrayed as anything other than just, one of us. In John 20, one of the first places that I remember noticing something different about him, that's after, I'm going to skip around a little. I'm not doing this in chronological order, but after the resurrection, we see him and another person racing to the tomb because they have heard that that tomb is empty. And they run to the tomb, and I suppose if we're supposed to picture them like our, children's church lesson in their robes, but they had to have them hiked up, which I think is kind of funny. So there they are. I can't even walk in sandals without getting rocks under my feet. I don't know how they did that, but they were running in their sandals with rocks, I'm assuming. And Peter, another thing that we have in common is apparently he's not very fast because the other person beat him to the tomb. And I can assure you, if I was racing anyone over, say, the age of 6 months, there's a good chance that I would lose. As a buddy of mine once said, Eric's strong enough to lift a truck, just don't ask him to run around it. And that is the truth. If I am ever running and you see me running, please stop. I am being chased. So, but at the door to the tomb, the other guy stops, and he's peering in there. Oh my gosh, it appears to be empty. Simon Peter catches up somewhere between 30 seconds and 30 minutes later, brushes right past the guy, goes in and starts like handling stuff. That would be me. First time I was ever in a Catholic church was in Palco, Kansas. I was there to speak at a Faith Promise weekend, and I'd never been to a Catholic church, and I was taken into an empty Catholic church. I'm fascinated by Catholicism, by the way. And so I was brought in, and so I walk in, and it's awesome. It's amazing, beautiful, out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, nowhere. Palco, Kansas, oftentimes when you say we're in the middle of nowhere, you're actually at the edge of nowhere because the middle of nowhere is Palco, Kansas. It's dead center. And so I went in, and they had that basin of holy water, and I don't know what they do with that, but I dipped my finger in it. And I'm not sorry, and if I went back, I'd do it again. So he runs in, and he's like handling stuff. And right away, I thought, I kind of like this guy when I read that. Because one of the first books I read, I started reading as an atheist at age 31, when I started my journey towards the altar. I started reading, by the way, in Genesis, because that's how we read in America, is from the beginning to the end. And I got to Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I was pretty much ready to go ahead and become something else other than a Christian. And someone said, "Oh, read John, because John is just full of love. It's the love book." And I said, "All right, I'll read John." So this is when I first start really noticing this guy's a little different. So he runs in, handles stuff. I'm sure if his mom was there, she would have said the same thing my mom did many a time, which is stop touching that. In Mark and Luke, we see the story of the storm when the disciples and Jesus are in the boat, and Jesus has the nerve to sleep up at the front of the boat. He's sleeping on a mat. And the storm, now this is in the Bible, but I'm going to ask you to take a little leap of faith with me. I've asked some of you to do it before. But they decide that they need to wake Jesus up because they're all going to die while he sleeps through it. And I'm just going to take a wild guess here. And my belief is that if they were going to say, just like with any of us, you wake him up. No, you wake him up. Who do you think would have been the guy that would have said, I'll wake him up? And even the question that's asked sounds like something that Simon Peter would have said. We're about to go down, dude. Don't you even care? It wasn't just, hey, can you take a look? It was, do you even care? Well, I just think that's got to be him. Funny that later on we see him, after he puts on the hero cape, when he's no longer a zero, we see the same guy that was waking up a sleeping Jesus, in my opinion, sleeping chained between two guards, and the angel has to poke him to wake him up. And it's worse than that. How many of you have little kids, and when a little kid goes to sleep, you ever wake them up like it's your grandparents, and you're trying to get them dressed, and they're like this? And you're it's like weekend at Bernie's, and you're putting their clothes on. The angel doesn't just have to poke him, he actually has to say, dude, get your stuff. Put on your sandals. Get your stuff. I can just see Peter like this. Because he's like that little kid. He's facing death. He's chained between guards. Out like a light. We see him again walking on water. How awesome would that be? I'm a boater, and the thought, even if I could see Jesus, and he said, hey, Eric, walk over here to me. I am absolutely certain that taking that first step off of that houseboat, I don't know how I would handle that. I am almost certain it would be something like this. But Peter, not only did he not call to Peter, Peter called to him and says, come, call me to you and I'll walk out there. Jesus says something like, all right. And so out he goes. He actually steps out of the boat. That's bold, man. That's bold. Now, he screwed it up, and it wasn't very long. And, of course, he was wishing he had water wings on. And he's starting to sink. And a lot of people believe that Jesus was scolding him. I don't believe that's the case at all. I think it was more like you do a little kid, Man, you were doing it, When you're teaching your kid to ride a bike, man, you were doing awesome. Then you quit pedaling. I think it was more like that than yelling at him. We see him walking on water, sort of. We see him running his mouth when he shouldn't. And this is in Matthew. Again, at the Transfiguration. Now let's picture that in our minds for a minute. Jesus takes his buddies up on this mountain. They're up in this area, all by themselves. And we know it's his buddies because we see Jesus taking those same people with him a lot. Peter's one of them. He was one of the inner circle guys. And suddenly, a couple of dead guys appear in a bright, shining light. See, Jesus is my buddy too. Time means nothing to Jesus. Jesus can put himself in and take himself out at any given point, however he wants. Jesus is my buddy right now. So there they are, and suddenly, poof, there it is. Bright light. These people, and they're talking. Now that would have been a great time when they talk about laying flat out before the Lord with your face down. That seems like that would have been a good time to do that. But not Peter. Nope. What does he say? Hey! It's good for us to be here, as if he knows anything. It's good for us to be here. I should build us 3 shelters. Now, these aren't shelters like tents, but more like a holy place, a tabernacle. And so he says he's just running his mouth. He wants to do something. But he needs to just shut up. And he just can't do it. One of our kids, we had a shirt for him that said something like, I want to be quiet, but I just can't quit talking. It might have been Tyler. Something like that. And so, one of the things that we see in the Old Testament, you've heard this said over and over again, we hear that God whispers. Remember, like in 1 Kings, the fire and the wind and the mountains crumbling, but God shows up in the still, small voice. And we talk about, our pastors tell us that we need to be able to quiet our hearts so we can hear the still, small voice. Well, it wasn't a still, small voice at the Transfiguration. You know how I know that? There's an exclamation point. Learned that over at Markleville, where I went to school. That means that he was excited. Exclamation point, it's an exclamation. And God says, this is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Now, that is like over at the school, Markleville, when they would say, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. That's because you're supposed to listen way more than you talk, Simon Peter. So we see him again, kind of just making a fool of himself. But we also see some good in Peter, along with being bold and decisive and a little out of control. In my opinion, we see some good when he lops off the soldier's ear. Now, my dad told me a long time ago, if you've got a handful of buddies that will show up when you need them, you are blessed beyond most people on this planet. Because when times get tough, most of your buddies aren't coming. He said, if you can count them even on one hand, you're blessed. And I believe he was right. Well, a friend that will lop off somebody's ear for you is a friend. I want that guy on my side. Now, granted, he was scolded for it again. And he was said, I'm not leading an armed rebellion here. He who lives by the sword dies by the sword. Put your sword away. But he still did it. And as a guy, that's still pretty cool. Jesus fixes the ear and goes on so he can fulfill prophecy. We're going to come back to that. Remember that term, fulfill prophecy. So, Jesus puts that ear back on and proceeds on basically what was the death march that had to happen before the resurrection. But then the worst is yet to come for Simon Peter. In Matthew 26, we see the denial of Christ. We see Simon Peter warming his hands on the fire built by the same people that were going to railroad Jesus right to the cross. And we see him denying that he even knew Jesus. Later, we see him bitterly weeping when he realizes what he's done. So it would be easy at this point to think, what a loser. What a buffoon. As Bugs Bunny would say, what a maroon. He's an embarrassment to the faith. Sure seems like it. Not at all. Neither are you. Neither are you. You're not an embarrassment to the faith. You're exactly the people that Jesus came here looking for. The Son of Man came to seek and to save that which was lost. You want to know why you're here? You're here because he said, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you. You're supposed to be seeking and saving. We are supposed to be seeking and saving. And if we are not doing that, then we are not doing it right. So, we see this guy that's at times kind of embarrassing. But I'm going to tell you right now, there was never a moment Jesus was embarrassed. There's some discussion about it, but a lot of people believe that Jesus was speaking directly to Peter and about Peter when he said, on this rock I will build the church. You see, Jesus had already skipped ahead to Acts 2. He already knew how many times Peter was going to foul it up. He knew how many times Peter was going to be off in the mud, lost. But he also knew when he was going to stand up and put the cape on. And he knows the same thing about you. When you stumble, whatever your weakness is, and we all have them, when you stumble, he is not surprised. Jesus doesn't immediately sound the alarm and say, oh my gosh, Eric's eating another Reese cup. That's not how it works. What he's saying is 3,500 more of those and you're going to have this beat. I see when you're going to win this. I know you're going to be a victor. I got this covered. Turn towards me. So he knew what was coming. Now, remember, I'm going to back up for just a minute, intentionally. What Trey asked me to speak to you guys about. He said, I want you to tell how Simon Peter directly affects your life or affected your life. And when I thought about that, I finally realized It was Simon Peter's altar call that led me to Christ. I answered an altar call by a disciple. How cool is that? Do you know there are preachers that will tell you that there were no altar calls in the Bible? They'll actually say that. There's never an altar call in the Bible. Well, we're going to cover that in a minute. But at the point when I was 31, as an atheist, my mother invited me to church. I had no fear of church. If you're an atheist, I've never understood there's atheists that act like they're afraid of a church. What's that? It's like, dude, man, it's like watching cartoons. Let's go. Let's see these people. And I was always a little jealous because I thought it was kind of like, do we have any little kids in here? I always thought it was kind of like Santa Claus. My life was better when I believed. Christmas was awesome when I really believed that. And so that was the way I felt about Christians. Man, I wished I believed that nonsense. So I would come and occasionally visit and watch you guys smirk. And so I started getting a little confused about this time, and I decided that I was going to really look into this Christian thing, this Jesus thing, from an analytical, I'm a very kind of an analytical person, so I was going to look into this from an analytical perspective and try to be open-minded. So I started digging in. I found a ton of stuff, way more than I can cover today, but I'm just going to hit a few highlights. Eric the Atheist on the journey, the beginning of the journey. I discovered that the Bible had been written not like I would have expected, but actually written over 1,500 years from start to finish. That it had covered 40 generations. It had over 40 authors. And it was written by so many different kinds of people, like very common people, very wealthy people, people who had more than they could ever need, people who were broke, people like Job who had plenty and then none and then plenty, people who were dying, people who were healthy, everything. It had it all. And yet, through all of that, and it had been written in 3 different continents. I didn't know that. I thought it had all just been written in that one little pocket over there, I discovered that the New Testament had been written fairly quickly after Jesus' death. Now, that's important. That's very important. Because you can lie about someone that was born 2,000 years ago. And there's nobody that's going to be around to say, no. That's not right. I knew the guy. I knew that guy, and you're completely wrong. So if the New Testament was written 50, 60, 70 A.D., where Jesus had only been gone for just really a few years, it would be like you guys 30 years from now, one of you younger people saying, I knew Eric Dwiggins. He was awesome. He was 6'5" and skinny as a rail. He wore a 28 waist at 6'5". That guy was built like a snake. Somebody would say, not the Eric Dwiggins I knew. He was not awesome, and that was not a 28-inch waist. So we know that these Bibles were being written and passed around by people in great peril, by the way, to have them in a relatively short period of time after the death. So we got all these weird variables, way more than that, going into the Bible, and yet there is this amazing continuity and clarity throughout the whole 1,500-year span, the multiple languages, the multiple generations, the rich people, the poor people, the dying people, the living people. All the people said the same thing, and that was that God's message was, I made it, I own it, I love you, here comes Jesus. That's it. The whole thing. And then we get one little area that's, there he is. I made it. I own it. I love you. Here comes Jesus. And there he is. And so all through, it's just pounding you with that same message over and over. So I knew all that stuff. I knew all that stuff as I was digging into this as an atheist, and then became confused, and then became maybe an agnostic. But I hadn't quite reached that tipping point of taking the chance. I've told a lot of people this. Becoming a Christian does not require faith to dive into an empty swimming pool and believe God will put water in it while you're in the air. It just takes enough faith to dive into the filled full pool. At some point, you just got to make the decision, I'm going in. I hadn't reached that point yet. I was up the ladder. I saw the water. Looked pretty good. Wasn't ready to dive yet. And then I come to Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2, we still got the same old Simon Peter, that guy, the good and the bad. But then something happened. You know, the day the superpowers come. You know, for Spider-Man, it was when he got bit by the spider. But not Simon Peter. This came when a big flame set on top of his noggin. Can you imagine that? You're in a room with a bunch of people, kind of holed up and praying, not exactly sure what you do next. And there's a sound of a mighty wind. And you look over at your friend, he's got a flame on his head. You look and you see his face. It looks maybe like you got a flame on your head too. Pretty big day. I've never had a flame on my head. Well, I did, but I beat it out real quick. And it's just from having a bigger brother. So when the day of Pentecost came, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven. It filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. Now, Eric is starting to walk a little farther out the diving board as this goes on. And it starts in verse 14, chapter 2, verse 14 of Acts. When Peter, the headline, the caption here is, Peter addresses the crowd. Just picture him coming out of the phone booth, getting his cape just right. Walking up there. I may not live through this, but I am fixing to tear into these people. This was the original come to Jesus meeting that you guys have heard about in your place of employment. This is the real one. And before I start, remember this. If you don't think you're special, listen to this. Most of these people that Peter is talking to already heard Jesus speak and said, no thanks. I don't need any of that. I'm good. I got a pension. I got retirement. I'm all good. Everything's taken care of for me. So he says, he stands up, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd. I don't want to get sidelined here, but I am going to say briefly in regards to tongues. I don't care what you believe in regards to that, but something happened here because he spoke one time and everybody understood. So that isn't like he just suddenly spoke Spanish in a Taco Bell. This is bigger than that, okay? He says, fellow Jews and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain this to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These men are not drunk as you suppose. It is only 9 a.m. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. Now here's what I kind of like about this, by the way, and I know this is probably borderline sacrilegious, but he points out these guys are, they're young guys, and they're at this kind of festival. He doesn't deny that they've been drunk. He says it's only 9 a.m. Now, 12 hours from now, I don't know how this is going to look. But right now, we're clear of mind. And again, I love that human aspect to this. I love that. But then he starts into the sermon. And he does the one thing that you are taught in public speaking to be very, very careful of. And I've said it from here before. Ross Perot was the perfect example of why you don't say you. Ross Perot, when he was running for president, for those of you that are old enough to remember, went to speak at the NAACP convention. And he made the mistake of referring to you people. And they began to turn on him, and he eventually became to the point where they weren't listening, they were shouting over him, and he left the stage for saying you people. Because when you say you people, you are separating yourself versus saying us people. So, every time he says the word you, and I'm not getting all of them, I'm just hitting a few highlights. Picture, have you ever had somebody talking to you and poking you in the chest? I hate that. I don't like that. And just think about that, him doing this. So he starts in, and he uses the dreaded you word. He says, men of Israel, listen to this. Jesus of Nazareth was a man accredited by God to you, not us, you, by miracles, wonders, and signs which God did among you through him. This man was handed over to you by God's set purpose and foreknowledge, and you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death. No mention of anybody yelling at him. No mentions of grumbling. God, he goes on. Oh, he's not done. He's just getting fired up. God, he's just to the point where he needs a drink of water. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses to the fact. Now, here's something interesting on my journey from atheist to Christian. They guarded the body to try to make it stay dead and failed. When the guards failed, they should have been put to death. Instead, they were paid to stay quiet. And if you were my Messiah and I had killed you and I thought it was so important to keep you dead that I had you guarded and then the body was gone, I would have turned that part of the country upside down, and I would have had so many people crucified that you wouldn't have been able to see the sky until somebody told me where that body was. They don't even mention hunting for the body because that's a small part of the world, and the word had already spread. Hey, that dead guy, he ain't dead no more. He'd done exactly what he said he was going to do. I got to believe somewhere in that crowd there was the guy that drove the nails. I believe I'm going to meet that guy in heaven. You think that guy didn't want to hear what Peter had to say? When he heard the guy got up, stone was gone, the guy got up, stone moved. Yeah, I think that guy's in there. I'm going to look for him. God has raised this Jesus to life, and we are all witnesses of the fact. God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Christ. Brothers, what shall we do? Peter replied to his own question, repent and be baptized, every one of you. With many other words, listen to this. He warned them and he pleaded with them. He pleaded with them. You see, Gary Smalley talks about the soft sandwich to use with your kids. Zoe just turned 16 yesterday, so I'm revealing one of my secrets. You love on them, you tell them how awesome they are, you chew them out, and then you love on them again. That's what Peter's doing here. He pleads with them. You know, we have people that think it's politically incorrect when a pastor does an altar call that's a little pushy. Political correctness, even in the pulpit. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. Well, I don't think Peter got that particular memo because he is making everybody uncomfortable. So again, Eric, as atheist, reading this, now that I know that the Bible is a real document written by real human beings, with many other words he warned them and he pleaded with them, save yourselves from this corrupt generation. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but those people over in the Middle East, they are a little excitable. And over there, if they don't like what you're saying, it is not going to work out for you. So, what I expected to happen around verse 40 was for me to see another caption here that says, Peter murdered by angry mob. Peter dragged by donkey and then murdered by angry mob. Peter beheaded and left his head on a stick. Peter crucified. I expected all of that. But what I read was, those who accepted his message, those who accepted his altar call, were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. That's 3,000 men. And for those of you men in here, it's the reason that you are the target of Satan so much. Because Satan knows if God gets you, there's a good chance he's going to get your wife and family. And Satan knows that too. If he gets you, there's a good chance he'll get your wife and your kids. So we see 3,000 get saved. That's a good day's work. He should have been able to go to Florida and play golf by that point. Still working. He goes on and we see him healing crippled people. We get over here and he's still pounding them with the ewes. You handed him over to be killed. You disowned him before Pilate. You killed the author of life, but God raised him from the dead. I love this. We're witnesses of this. He's saying we saw it. We saw it. He goes before the Sanhedrin. He has every chance in the world to back down. And what does he do? Oh, well, the number of men grew to 5,000. He's slipping. He only got 2,000 that time. So now we have 5,000 men. Who knows how many women and children? He's still not done. We skip ahead a little further and he's still telling them. It's by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, but who God raised from the dead, that this man stands before you healed. I could go on and on and on. I could go on until there was no gravy left at Cracker Barrel. Because this is real. The number has been growing ever since. Right now in the world, it may not be here, but in the world, Christianity is on the rise. God is on the move. And for those of you who in your heart are doubters, or maybe you know someone that's a doubter, I'm going to give you one more fact of faith, and then we're going to do an altar call. I told you early on, this is what this is about. This is about if you are not sure in your heart where you're going to spend eternity, that this is your chance. There's a number. I think he's got it back there. Can you bring that up? I can't read that number. Rebecca Miles might be able to. I can't read that number. I can read one. I'm awesome on that. But this is 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 16, 17 zeros. 17 zeros after the number 1. I know there's no such thing as a Christian gambler, but just in case that there was someone that was involved in that Triple Crown deal with all the excitement, the chances of one human being fulfilling the prophecy leading up to Christ is not 1 in 5, not 1 in 10, not even like Jim Carrey, not even 1 in a million like he says in Dumb and Dumber. It's 1 in that number. That's the chances of one human being fulfilling all the prophecy. So there you go. Simon Peter led me to Christ a couple thousand years ago, and he just had to wait for me to get here. Because he should have been killed right then, and he wasn't. And you know what? Probably wouldn't have mattered if they had. I'll bet they wish they did when they started seeing those people flocking. Billy Graham don't have nothing on Simon Peter, and every one of almost probably a whole lot of those people had heard Jesus speak and said no thanks. You're special. You're special because you're going to get the opportunity in however much life you have left to speak to people that have already heard about Jesus and said no thanks. You might be the one, and yours don't have to be like Simon Peter's. Your message might be just one of love and grace, forgiveness, salvation, acceptance, salvation, strength in his weakness, salvation. That could be yours. I don't know what yours is, but I know which one led me to Christ, and it was that one right there. That bold one that made someone say, what are we going to do? And that's when Simon Peter said, I got a plan. Come up here to this altar. Come out here into this river. So that's my plan now, Ryan. We're going to open the altars up. And with everything that I've laid on you here, if you have not accepted Christ, truly accepted Christ into your heart as your Lord and Savior, or if you still have doubts, this is the day. This is the day. And if we don't have a single person in here that doesn't already have their reservations confirmed for heaven, then this message is so you can make sure that those that you love and care about, those that you don't, and those that you don't even know, this is your message too. Because everybody's going somewhere forever. I'm going to heaven.